I don't think I've ever heard, at least not recently, this discussed. Like, at least not in this way. They started describing the roles traditionally that women play in kind of community building, and then contrast those, and they start debating how to frame that. And this is a fascinating back and forth that happened here. So we'll play this one for you guys next.
Women, it split women. In many ways, the second wave of feminism, women were historically, for millennium, the caretakers of a community, the community leaders. They would check on the elderly, they would feed the poor, they would take care of the children, right? So what happened is that we took them out of their caretaking roles, and it was like taking a keystone species out of the environment. Much of the environment degraded and shriveled up. That's why we're seeing 50%. That's why we're seeing, in my opinion, that's why we're seeing such a rise in mental illness.
Man, okay, just that's that idea that women like it's so interesting to hear somebody use a biological metaphor like that, a keystone species within an environment. So, and all of a sudden you take that and the entire environment collapses, and you have to kind of trace it back to what happened. And so she describes like this role that women used to play, and of course, this is definitely triggering Deborah. So you'll see how that works.
Women aren't going to check on their neighbors anymore. They're not feeding the poor at their local church. They're really preoccupied with making money and materialism and the GDP and a world in which they are no longer caretakers. Now, not everybody's meant to be a caretaker, but the point is, once we lose that linchpin, the society
The
degrades.
ecosystem.
It degrades.
Is it our job to be down at the soup kitchen and checking on the elderly neighbour? Surely that's the community's job. We should raise our sons and daughters to do that. All children should be raised to check on. It's not women's job. I work in a writer's room at the moment.
This is where I think it's so important to constantly pay attention to the words being used. And I wish, like, I would have a much harder time with what she said if she said, it's not mother's job." And this is why the word women is so there's a constant tension in this conversation where Erica will describe the role of really mothers, right? And then it gets contrasted to an entire gender. Like, is this only the job of women? This is a very difficult thing to figure out. And all of during this whole debate, I think this is constantly a question I'm having as they're using these words.
And I love it. And I am not less good in the room than any man. I get so much joy from it. It's so exciting. If we say, oh, feminism took away my key linchpin role where I have to like go to a soup kitchen and then check on a neighbor and check on the graphic, while men still get to go into the writer's room and create an animated feature film like it was in the 50s or the 60s or even the 70s or the 80s or the damn 90s, let's be honest. I don't get to do that. The film gets to be more male. It tells the story to the next generation, and the boys get to make that film. And the stories go on and on and on. That my role is checking on the elderly neighbor, and the man's role is to go and write the exciting movie and create
hang
the
on,
story.
that's not the counterpart. Men do.
I love what Louise does here because there's different ways you can argue for what she's describing here, but what Louise describes here, I think, is really important.
Pro-social things too. They don't just write TV shows. They fight fires, they earn money, they chop wood. I'm being really
But I'm
stereotypical
talking
there,
about what Erica was saying about
but there's
the
a
unpaid
counterpart.
labour of checking.
So can I say, I think that one of the problems we have in the contemporary world, and this applies just as much to men as to women, we talked about the manosphere earlier, is that gender roles contain both privileges and responsibilities, both of them. So men do other pro-social things, right? And I think that genuinely one of the problems that we have in contemporary culture, having rejected so much of traditional gender ideas, is that gender roles traditionally contain both privileges and responsibilities. So for men, the privileges are kind of obvious, like feminists have drawn a lot of attention to these. But men also have counterpart responsibilities, which includes things like dying for their country or for their family, which includes doing backbreaking labor. There are all sorts of hard things that men are expected to do in exchange. I think this is the unwritten agreement, in exchange for those responsibilities, those privileges rather. Women have that too. So women have some privileges. You get to the women and children first principle when it comes to saving lives. Women are often the beneficiaries of what's called benign sexism. So men being kind of deferential to women, like nice gentlemanly men being deferential to women. There's this cognitive bias called the women are wonderful principle, where people will actually, if you ask someone do you want to save a woman that you don't know or a man that you don't know from drowning, people will overwhelmingly choose to save the woman. So there are those privileges. There are also responsibilities, and they include things like caring work, which is hard, and the danger and difficulty of childbearing, which is really hard. And I think that one of the problems, and maybe this is narcissistic, I don't know, this is a touchy word, but maybe this is narcissistic, is that both sexes want the privileges without the responsibilities.
Oh,
Yeah.
man. So good. Like, we're a team. It's almost
Mhm.
like we were meant to work together in that there are different, like, we're almost like, it's almost like we were wired to do very different things, but
Right.
they're complementary. Like, it's like she's describing reality so well, but you're not supposed to say these things. You're supposed to compare men's privileges with women's responsibility. And that's the trick that's constantly happening. And that's what Deborah was doing. And she could not get away with it with these women. I thought that was remarkable. What struck you about that?
I've actually recently thought about this a lot, not necessarily in the terms of the community, but the caregiving in a family. Mom and I have kind of talked about it because after I had my first, I was really shocked by how difficult postpartum recovery was and felt like, oh, I didn't really hear like anyone talk about this. And my mom is the one that was helping a lot, like making the food that I'm supposed to be eating, like the nourishing food, and coming once Matthew had to go back to work, coming and like, taking care of me, making sure I get a shower, like all that kind of stuff. And I we were just kind of joking because our family all of a sudden is about to have the fourth grandchild in a very short amount, and like within 3 years. Um, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And mom took like a doula course so that she could be at our births. And she was at my two births. She's gonna be at my sister's. And it's just like I was joking with her, like, Mom, most women go back to work when their kids grow up and get out of the house, and you're gonna be too busy taking care of all the pregnant postpartum moms. And I I just kind of said it as a joke, but I've honestly thought that, like,
Mm.
there are certain things, like, on social media I've seen that are, like, really cool places, like spas and resorts that people can go to for, like, postpartum recovery. Some of them are, like, in Asia, where, like, nurses will take care of your baby, and they'll feed you really nourishing meals, and you pay thousands of dollars, and there's, like, all these healing things, like, I don't know, like saunas and pools and whatever to, like, just focus on healing. And I'm like, "Oh, that looks really tempting," but it's, like, super expensive, only really rich people get to do this. And then I realized, like, if everyone had a mom that was still taking care of them as an adult, you wouldn't need a special resort like this to go to heal after you have a baby.
Yeah.
You can just do it at home, your mom taking care of you. And, so that's, like, the very small way in which I haven't thought of it for, like, a society as a whole, like the elderly and the poor and things like that being the role of, mothers. But I do think, like, if you just start with the people in your family, and if you're actually, like, the stay-at-home mom role changes. Like,
Mm.
it's still being a mother is still your primary identity, or can still be your primary identity, even when all of your kids become adults. Because if you raise them to get married and start having children, and then they do that, and then they all start having children, then you have daughters and daughters-in-law and grandchildren to start helping with and caring for, and that becomes the village that mothers so desperately need.
Right.
Um, like, people complain all the time, like, I wasn't meant to be, like, a personal chef and an Uber driver and an educator and, like, all of these things. Like, lots of people can't do that alone, and that's why it is meant to be done, like, as a family. And if you don't have that upstream, then you can start working on creating that for your children and being that person.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, mom and I did a podcast a couple months ago because of a article, about this Ugandan woman who was living in Switzerland trying to have a baby, and it was so difficult, so miserable that she moved back to Uganda because she was immersed in this village that you're describing. There was aunties, and there was her mom was there, and a grandmother, and all these people were there, and they were very much like cheering them on and like helping them with postpartum, And so you have this dynamic. We've destroyed that dynamic, and I think it's really important to say to any women listening to this that a lot of you have to decide, are you going maybe you didn't receive that kind of care. Maybe your mom's not there for you, and this village has been sort of eradicated. You can build this for a future generation. You can decide to be the mother, the grandmother who is helping, right? That's something that you could set as a goal. Maybe it's something that's difficult to achieve financially, but it's something that you really want to consider as a vision. But part of this goes all the way back to kind of the debate that they're having, and that is, you cannot denigrate unpaid, caring work that needs to be done in the home. You can't primarily evaluate the value of caring in the home through an economic lens. It is not susceptible to an economic lens. It's not a part of the GDP. Do not think about that work in that way. You have to think about it from the perspective of family building, which is more important than the national economy to the person in that family. And this is where all this is broken down. If you're not in a family building project with your husband, and then preferably with your multi-generational family, then everyone kind of disperses to the wind, and this keystone species gets ripped out of the environment. These caring women who really understand, have the skills, have the desire to protect the relationships within a larger multi-generational family structure, to care for all of the people within that structure as it grows and multiplies rapidly.